Good afternoon and welcome to Ballot Breakdown, a virtual town hall.
This is an opportunity to learn about the measures and propositions that will be on the November ballot. And after this special one-hour session, we hope you feel prepared to go out and vote.
Here's a look at the ballot issues we will explore over the next hour. Just a few days before early voting begins, KXAN breaks down what's on the ballot. Austin's Proposition A would require the city to hire hundreds more police officers. Among its mandates, a ratio of 2 officers for every 1,000 residents. It has the backing of 3 former Austin mayors.
There's nothing wrong with having too many police officers, but there's a lot wrong with having too few.
Critics who say no way also argue directing hundreds of millions more dollars to the police budget will require siphoning that money out of other budgets. And that includes the Austin Firefighters Union.
Firefighters love and support our police officers, but don't be misled.
All Texans are being asked whether to change the state's constitution.
These are getting to be her last days. Can you imagine your mother being alone?
Proposition 6 would establish a right for people living in nursing homes or assisted living facilities to designate an essential caregiver who cannot be barred from visiting in person. It's a reaction to the pandemic, when many Texans were not allowed to see their loved ones.
There is no one on the face of the earth that has a more vested interest in the health and safety as our loved ones.
Rising deaths and hospitalizations led to new restrictions on gatherings, raising new questions about the First Amendment.
I want a law this session that prevents any government entity from shutting down religious activities in Texas.
And now your vote could change the Texas Constitution.
KXAN presents Ballot Breakdown, a virtual town hall answering your questions before you go to the polls.
And thank you for joining us. I'm Britt Marino.
I'm Robert Hadlock. This evening, KXAN has invited guests here into our studio who represent different viewpoints on the upcoming election. They include Austin City Council members Pio Renteria and Paige Ellis, who will help us understand Austin's Proposition B. Joining us later to discuss Austin's Proposition A are Mayor Steve Adler, Council Member Mackenzie Kelly, Austin Police Commander Donald Baker, and former Austin City Council member and retired UT professor Bill Spellman. After our ballot breakdown concludes, we'll get valuable perspective from inside the Austin Police Department with the newly appointed Chief, Joseph Chacon. For everyone's health safety, all of us here in the studio have today tested free of COVID-19.
And we still want your questions about the November 2nd election. Email us at reported@kxan.com or use the hashtag KXAN Town Hall on social media. And remember, early voting starts next Monday, October 18th.
Austinites will decide what happens to parkland in East Austin when they head to the polls. That's because state law requires voters to approve any sale of public squares or parks.
KXAN's Taharat Rahman explains what's at stake in Austin's Proposition B.
If passed, the measure would allow the city to issue a call for proposals so that they could swap 9 acres of land here along South Lakeshore Boulevard with at least 48 acres of waterfront land that's next to a city park.
To understand why 9 for 48, we turn to Grow Austin Parks, the political action group supporting Proposition B. According to city filings, they're almost completely funded by Oracle America, which sits next door to the parkland that would be traded. The PAC says Oracle already has a bid for that land to present to the city if Prop B passes. And the PAC says the swap includes this tract of land in purple, where Driveway Austin Motorsports sits. Its owner, Bill Dolahite, tells me he's not at liberty to say who the buyer is or if it's under contract, but that, quote, the deal is secure if Prop B passes.
It's very difficult historically to allocate green space or invest green space in parklands for our low-income minority communities, and I see this maybe as another win-win situation opportunity.
Whichever bidder the city chooses to acquire the 9-acre parcel would also have to cover the cost of a new maintenance facility for the Parks and Recreation Department and at least partially fund the removal of this maintenance building at Fiesta Gardens.
This particular property has been very important to our Mexican-American community here in the barrio because this is where we come to celebrate quinceañeras, weddings.
The maintenance areas at Fiesta Gardens would then be restored to public parkland.
We're being played There is money there.
Martha Cotera says the city should already have the money to buy the waterfront land they want from previous bonds, and they shouldn't have to give up any land from East Austin. In 2018, voters passed $149 million for acquisitions and improvements, including spots in East Austin.
The tragedy is how East Austin is led to believe that their only way out is to give up something very precious for somebody else when there is money and has been money in the reserve that we all vote for and paid for.
Tahira Rahman, KXAN News.
And we want to let you know Oracle declined to comment on this report.
We invited Austin City Council members Paige Ellis and Sabino Pio Renteria to join us for some insight on Proposition B.
And we'd like to start with Councilmember Ellis. Thank you so much for being here. City staff told us that only 19% of that $149 million we heard in Tahira's package has been used so far in that bond. So why is this proposition being called a swap rather than maybe just a land purchase?
Well, it's because of the full package deal. Anytime we would let go of any sort of parkland, it would have to be for a very good reason. In this particular case, the situation is that we would love all of these three items that are on the ballot to be met by someone. It would still go through a public bidding process, and we think this is a really good opportunity to acquire parkland on the east side.
Councilmember Renteria, got a couple of questions. How did you come up with that 48-acre number for the land you want to add to Austin's park space?
This particular piece of property has been eyed upon by the city, especially the city parks. We have made offers to him in the past about buying that piece of land from him, and he didn't want to at that time. And we knew that it would complete the John Trevino Park. There's a big hole gap there. And my whole view of this whole area is really it's a beautiful part of Austin that people do not know and do not even know about it. It's been used as a dump ground for years. If you drive through there or fly over, you'll see two little small mountains there of roofing shingles. So I always believed that it was been an injustice and that we need to correct that and really recapture that. And it's one of the largest land swap, where largest parkland that we will get in the last 40 years. You know.
Just to be clear, you already have a swap location identified, as Grow Austin Parks PAC seems to think.
Well, yes, and we're going to grow Austin Parks, and the way that maintenance yard came around was it was there at the MAC, Mexican American Cultural Center, and we passed a bond to move this the maintenance yard over to where it's now at on Lakeshore, and because of that, you know, we were able to build a beautiful center, and I do really believe that if we sell this piece of land, and for what's going to happen at Fiesta Garden, because there's also a maintenance yard, and we want to recapture the historic place there where it's been in our view belonged to East Austin, and we really wanted a beautiful park there and open it up, being able to open it up to the public.
And really quickly, Mr. Renteria, I see you have a prop with you. Is there a reason that you have the helmet?
I'm a bicyclist.
Okay.
I bicycle.
He rode his bike here.
Okay, that explains it all.
Nice day to do it.
Well, yeah. Council members Renteria and Ellis, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you for having us.
We want to shift now to explain the 8 different state constitutional amendments you'll see on your ballot. We start with Proposition 6, since it pertains to a topic we've covered a lot here on KXAN over the past year.
And Prop 6 would ensure that nursing home and assisted living facility residents have a right to certain visitors no matter what. KXAN's Avery Travis shows us why some people are fighting to pass this.
For months, Mary Nichols and her mother were separated when the doors of her mother's nursing home closed to stop the spread of COVID-19.
She can't even turn her own head at this point, so she doesn't have any human contact if I'm not there, sitting there singing to her, talking to her.
That's why she started the group Texas Caregivers for Compromise, advocating for 2 designated family caregivers per resident to be allowed inside these types of facilities, despite other COVID restrictions. And earlier this year, the Texas legislature agreed, writing that into law, with dozens of lawmakers from both sides of the aisle signing on their support.
I felt like we were saving the body but killing the spirit. We can never do that again.
Now, many of these lawmakers and family members like Nichols want to take it a step further.
When there is an emergency, when there is an infection control issue.
Senator Lois Kolkhorst wrote what's now a proposed amendment to the Texas Constitution, ensuring long-term care residents have the right to one in-person essential caregiver, even if we're in a state of emergency.
Laws can be paused. You can push a hold button on those laws. If it is a constitutional right, they cannot do that.
Avery Travis, KXAN News.
Proposition 1 would let professional rodeo associations and charities have raffles at rodeo arena venues here in Texas. A similar amendment passed in 2017. That included major league sports, racing events, and professional golf events.
Proposition 2 would give counties the power to issue transportation bonds to pay for infrastructure projects in underserved or deteriorating areas.
There are 2 judiciary-related measures on this ballot this year. Proposition 4 updates the eligibility requirements for Texas Supreme Court justices, a judge of the Court of Criminal Appeals, a justice of a Court of Appeals, and a district judge.
And Proposition 5 would let the Texas State Commission on Judicial Conduct investigate complaints against candidates running for state judicial office.
During the peak of the pandemic last year, many churches shifted to online, outdoor, and socially distanced services.
But some local officials ordered churches to shut the doors completely. Proposition 3 would stop that from ever happening again.
KXAN's Maggie Glenn reports on why Republican lawmakers want voters to pass the new amendment.
I just encourage every pastor truly to seek wisdom and counsel and to be able to look yourself in the mirror in the morning and say, I, to the best of my ability, did what I believed was right.
Religious leaders across the state had a tough decision to keep their doors open or closed to help stop the spread. But in some places, churches didn't have a choice.
We saw multiple local ordinances and other governmental entities shutting down churches,
which Republican lawmakers said reached too far.
The Constitution of Texas and the United States is very clear. The government should not shut down churches.
That's why they passed the bill that became Prop 3, barring any governmental entity from shutting down churches even in disasters or emergencies. The bill passed with bipartisan support, but some opposed the new law, saying the churches were ordered closed to protect public health and did not impede on religious freedoms.
If a fire marshal orders a number of people to leave a church building because it is currently overfull, that is not an infringement of anyone's right to exercise their religion.
The Constitution and case law has allowed for reasonable time, place, and manner restrictions on certain First Amendment rights, but this was much different. This was completely shutting down and foreclosing the opportunity to worship, and that's where government greatly overreached.
And here's a look now at the 2 propositions pertaining to taxes. Proposition 7 would allow the surviving spouse of a disabled person to keep a homestead property tax if the spouse is 55 or older and still living in the home when the person died.
Proposition 8 would give a homestead tax exemption to any surviving spouse of military members killed or fatally injured in the line of duty. Right now, the Texas Constitution gives the exemption to spouses of members of the armed forces who are killed in action. This proposition would expand it to military members who die in military training or other military duties.
After the break, a conversation on Proposition A, the top ballot item for Austin voters. Councilmember Mackenzie Kelly and Commander Donald Baker are joining us here in the studio.
We will also take an in-depth look at crime in Austin and other cities across the country. You're watching Ballot Breakdown, a virtual town hall. Well, welcome back to KXAN's virtual town hall. In this part of our ballot breakdown, we want to focus on the item that's generated the most discussion here in Austin, that being Proposition A.
Yes, and stay with us through the next half hour, and you will hear from several different perspectives for those for and against Prop A. But first, we do want to give you an overview and a little bit of context. Dana Marin reports.
When you look down at your ballot for the City of Austin special election, you're going to see this. It's Prop A for Austin voters in November, proposed to be a solution to public safety.
If passed, would force the city to add a couple hundred extra officers, double the number of hours police get in yearly refresher training, mandate more time spent on community policing, and provide pay incentives to minorities to create a more diverse force.
It comes as the Austin Police Department implements changes in an attempt to take on staffing challenges.
An officer shortage in the Austin Police Department has triggered the downsizing or suspension of 14 different departments.
If you are experiencing a non-emergency call,
What we ask that you do is to report those either over the phone by calling 311 or by doing it online at ireportaustin.com.
The staffing problem made worse by a freeze of new cadet classes after complaints against a former assistant chief of police alleging derogatory language.
An ongoing analysis from a consulting group hired by the City of Austin recommends more than 24 big changes to the department's 8-month-long training academy.
A staffing shortage Austin police have been talking about for years.
APD graduating classes have only been a little more than half full.
We're 114 officers short right now. Recruitment is a challenge nationwide right now.
Meanwhile, a new state law punishing cities that cut funding for police.
You may remember after local protests last summer, City Council diverted APD funding to other areas like EMS, a family violence shelter, and workforce development.
That state law led Austin's City Council to pass the largest police budget ever, $443 million, restoring police funding and even adding an extra $10 million.
Do you think we could count on your support to vote?
Thank you very much. Absolutely. Appreciate
Awesome.
it.
Prop A comes from Save Austin Now, the same group that got Austin's homeless camping ban reinstated in May.
We worked very hard and we were able to pass Prop B. And because of that, we're now rallying around this issue.
And those against it say no way on Prop A.
The bottom line is the way we do policing now does not make us feel safe. We don't need more cops, we need more resources.
A key factor in the debate is money.
The city estimates staffing up to 2 police officers for every 1,000 Austinites would cost between $271 million and nearly $600 million over the next 5 years.
It's very important for our community to know that the fiscal note with this proposition and the impact that this could cause and how that would tie our hands as local policymakers. We would have to look at making cuts.
The Union for Firefighters in the city is opposing the ballot item.
It was never about disrespecting police. It was only about examining the negative consequences of a poorly written law that, if passed, would have enormous negative impacts on public safety as a whole, including fire and EMS, as well as parks, libraries, and other essential city services.
A price tag supporters of the proposition say is an overestimate.
This is just a fear-mongering tactic.
Our city budget is $4.5 billion. We're asking for, on the low end, a $54 million commitment. We think it's less than that, but a $54 million annual commitment to ensure we have enough police officers. That's 1.4% of the city budget.
I can assure you that we have passed enough money through social services programs that have no reason to be provided by municipal government, that we have the money at the city to prioritize public safety and provide additional staffing.
Money and public safety, the top ballot issue Austin voters will decide in November. Daniel Marin, KXAN News.
And joining us now is Austin Police Commander Donald Baker and Austin City Council member Mackenzie Kelly, who are supporters of Prop A.
First, Commander Baker, how long have you been at APD?
A little over 27 years.
And if Prop A passes, how long do you believe it would take to reach the 2 officers per 1,000 resident ratio?
It's going to take us, and that's all dependent on how many academy classes we get started. So I think that's the variable there. If the city put the resources to it, we could probably do it in 2 years, but that's going to take several academy classes, the full academy classes, and modified. So I think the effort, we put the money and resources there, we're going to be able to do it. If not, we could be like San Jose 10 years down the road, still not making their numbers.
You know, the money is so important in this measure. Councilmember Kelly, I have a question for you. Both sides agree here that the low end of how much this would cost is $54 million. And we just heard you saying that Austin has the funds for this. So is this on top of the $443 million that council budgeted for APD for the fiscal year that started October 1st? And where do you see the money coming from to fund this?
Well, as with any city budget, it really is up to the city council to determine where their priorities are. We see a large sum, millions of dollars, going towards homelessness in the community. We see it towards social services and those sorts of things that really don't need to be funded by municipal government. We could rely on our non-government partners to fund those items. What we need to do is provide additional staffing to the police department, which was not covered in this budget.
A viewer named Buddy asked what approach the city would take on cuts to other departments.
I would say that it's really all up in the air. The city council needs to come back like they are able to do and really decide what's important and what's not important when this passes. I know that Councilmember Kassar has suggested that the fire department would be cut. He decided that possibly parks would be cut. And those things really need to be calibrated and calculated by the council as a whole. That's why we have a council. It should be the will of the entire council to make those choices.
Are you suggesting that that is not true then? Those departments wouldn't see those types of cuts?
I would say that it would be the will of the council to decide if that was where to go, but it would be absurd to me if we would actually cut additional public safety funding.
Okay, thank you so much. And since public safety is central to this discussion, we did want to get a better picture of changes in Austin's crime rates.
For that in-depth insight, let's turn to KXAN.com reporter Kelsey Thompson.
I analyzed data from the Federal Bureau of Investigation and city population levels, and what I found is all broken down in detail at KXAN.com right now. Here are the highlights. In 2020, Austin saw an increase in the number of homicide and aggravated assault cases. Those rises are on trend with national figures. I also looked at other crimes, and those all line up roughly with rates across the country. Because staffing ratios are central to the discussion about Prop A, I looked at data in major cities meeting the proposed threshold of at least 2 officers per 1,000 residents, specifically Dallas and Los Angeles. They saw upticks in violent crimes. There were 236 homicides in Dallas during 2020, up from 2019. In Los Angeles, homicide cases jumped by nearly 100 in 2020 to more than 350. And because there's been a focus on the record number of homicides this year, I analyzed the most recent data per capita to see how Austin's growth factors in. The city's homicide rate was 4.84 homicides per 100,000 residents last year. That's a 24% increase from 3.91 homicides per 100,000 residents in 2019. Again, that matches what we're seeing across the country. Britt, Robert, back to you.
Thank you so much, Kelsey. And so what Kelsey is pointing out there, that one of the major arguments for Prop A is that increasing community policing will help reduce the crime rate. So do you agree with that or disagree with that?
I absolutely do agree with that. I am the only current sitting council member who's been through the 13-week-long Austin Police Department Citizens Police Academy. I learned how important it is to get out and educate people on what the police department does. And I will tell you that oftentimes in communities that lack resources, their first interaction with a police officer is bad. And so we want to prevent that from happening and give them a good police interaction.
Prop A would require officers to spend 35% of their time doing community policing. Commander Baker, would that mandate make your job easier or harder?
Oh, much easier. We showed that when we did the Restore Runberg efforts. We took officers that were able to do a mobile walking beat, spent that community engagement time to build relationships, and we saw violent crime decrease. So that's what that community engagement time is. That's that patrol availability factor. That means they're not just running from call to call. They're able to spend the time to be able to listen to the residents. What are their issues? What are their concerns? What are they seeing going on? So then you can address root causes of the problems.
Thank you so much. So we do want to go to Will Dupree now, who's in our KXAN live studio, and he's monitoring what our audience is saying online. So Will, what questions are you seeing?
Yeah, Brett, we are getting all kinds of questions coming into our newsroom at this time, but we want to direct this one to Councilmember Mackenzie Kelly. This one comes from Sarah Smith, and if you take a look here, she wrote in, proponents have argued that police response times are too long and cases are not receiving enough attention because APD is understaffed. So what data do you have to support the claim that response times are down and case closure rates have stagnated?
Councilmember, would you like to respond to that?
Absolutely. I've heard from constituents and people all across Austin who are having problems getting police officers to their calls. I've spoken with officers who are already understaffed to the level that they know they're not going to make it to a call as quickly as they would like to. As far as the data goes, that's really a police department question, and they have that available.
Well, let me get your response to that question.
Response times are definitely up. And it's very frustrating for officers that want to respond to these calls for services, that they don't have the resources to be able to get there. We also are hearing that there's a huge backlog in the report from the online reporting, 311, 911. So we know the community's feeling that. We just had a damage of a burglary of a business down on South Lamar this past weekend. Over 8,000 of material stolen, 20,000 damage, and we couldn't send an officer out there to do that. We know we have shifts that are just showing up understaffed. Our 98% of the time, our authorized staffing is not being met. Over 50% our minimum staffing is not being met. So we know that's impacting our quality of service that we're able to give to the community.
Councilmember Kelly, the push to change our approach to public safety stemmed from unrest about police interactions with the community, both in this city and around the country. Prop A, if it passes, how will the council answer their concerns about police accountability?
Well, I'm pleased to say that I've talked with members of the Reimagining Public Safety Task Force, and their work will continue to go on. They are community stakeholders who are very interested in seeing policing change in our city, and they provide really good insight about how we could do that. My concern is that while we're making change, we're throwing the baby out with the bathwater, and we're not allowing for the correct staffing level at our police department to make meaningful change. In fact, officers, in order to take additional training, they need to be taken off of their patrol from the streets to be given the opportunity to even attend training, and then their positions have to be backfilled.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for both of you being here. We appreciate it. And after the break, we will continue our conversation into Proposition A. Mayor Steve Adler and former City Council member Bill Spellman explain why they say the price tag on the ballot item could hurt city budgets across the board. That is coming up next in KXAN's Ballot Breakdown.
KXAN presents Ballot Breakdown, a virtual town hall answering your questions before you go to the polls.
If you're just joining us, instead of our regularly scheduled newscast here at 5, we are devoting this time to inform you about the November election issues. After that, we are speaking with Austin's newly appointed Chief of Police. He'll join us live later in this half hour to share what's happening inside the Austin Police Department.
Up first, we do want to have a conversation about Prop A with Mayor Steve Adler and former City Council member Bill Spellman. And we want to show you some of the important language Austin voters will see on the ballot.
There it is on your screen. Prop A says the ordinance would enhance public safety and police oversight, transparency, and accountability by adding new Chapter 2-16 to City Code. That would establish minimum standards for the police department. That ratio we keep hearing about prescribe minimal requirements for achieving the public safety, and the city estimated the cost at $271.5 million to $598.8 million over 5 years. And that translates to about $54 million to $120 million per year. Mayor Adler, that cost is our first question. Budget-wise, you're bound by a couple of state laws.
Kenneth Gregory points out 2019's Senate Bill 2 will not allow tax revenue to grow more than 3.5% in a normal year. And this year's HB 1900 would penalize Austin for any reduction to the police budget year over year. So the big question today, how will we pay for Prop A if it passes? And we'll direct that to you, Mayor, if you'd like to start off.
There's only one way to be able to pay for Prop A if it passes, and that's going to be to cut things that are in our budget, because our budget is pretty much set by the legislature. It's important to note that the legislature also had us return the police budget to more than we have ever put in the police budget before. It exceeds $10 million more than we've ever spent, about $430 million altogether. But Proposition A would add another $300 to $600 million over the next 5 years. You're going to have to cut, public safety is 70% of our budget. Some of it's going to have to come out of that. The other 30% of our budget, you just heard my colleague on the council talk about cutting spending on homelessness and social services. What a horrible thing that would be. But I think that parks and pools, everything, to fund Prop A at that incredibly high and irresponsible price tag would require cuts, including fire and EMS, and that's why the Fire Association is opposing Prop A.
It just seems so wild to think that we might cut from those types of public service departments in order to fund this, especially when we just heard your colleague saying that Austin does have the money to fund this. What would you say to that? Or Mr. Spellman, would you like to say something?
Where is the money going to come from?
The vast majority of the Austin budget is for enterprise funds, which are self-supporting on fees, like Austin Energy, Austin Water. The general fund is the only thing that's supported by taxes, and we have there's a cap on how much more money we can take in property taxes, 3.5%, as you just mentioned. There's a limit to how much more tax money can come in. What Prop A would require is that basically everything that comes in goes to the police, and that's still going to give us a shortfall in all of our other general fund agencies. Fire, EMS, public health, all this is going to have to be on the table, and some of it's going to have to be reduced.
Now, for some context about our current status, APD's record budget looks a lot bigger than last year's.
But in terms of the services Austinites receive, there isn't a big difference, as the numbers show. KXAN investigator Kevin Clark compares this year to last year.
Last year, the Austin Police final budget was around $309 million. This year's budget reaches $443 million. The difference is approximately $133 million. So where did that come from? In 2020, Austin City Council moved more than $100 million out of APD's budget. That included funding for the Forensics Department, the 911 Dispatch Center, along with Lake and Mounted Patrol. Those services never went away. They were moved into other city departments. But this year, Austin moved that funding back into APD because of the new state law requiring cities to approve police budgets at or above the highest amount in the past 2 years. But what about the rest of the difference in APD's budget this year and last? More than $6 million funds the cadet class, which began in June, and the 2 classes scheduled for 2022. The rest are incremental costs, like pay increases, a new retirement contribution, and equipment maintenance. Keep in mind, APD has made changes to its own staffing plan. This year, the department told us it downsized or suspended 14 different units, from Lake Patrol to Motors and the DWI unit. But it's not because they lacked the funding. They didn't have enough officers due to the city suspending a year's worth of cadet classes, along with resignations and retirements. Back to you.
Okay, so when we take that in and we consider all that, the funding restored under APD's umbrella, why then are we still having this conversation about cuts being made to these other departments, like you mentioned, Mayor, fire, EMS, libraries, even the pools and the parks? How do we still talk about that and think that that's still plausible for us?
Well, I think you've hit it right on the head. We spend more per capita on police now than any other major city in Texas, and we already have the funding we need. There are 200 funded open positions right now that we just need to fill. So we need to be accelerating our efforts, as the council has, to accelerate the cadet classes. We need to be taking a look at retention pay, but those spots are already there. Proposition A is not talking about anything that's already there. They're not talking about the 200 unfilled, already funded spots. They're saying, let's have 500 more spots that we pay on top of that. So we're going to have to find the money on top of spending more than any other city does per capita and figure out how we fund those additional 500 or more officers. And that's the challenge.
Okay, and our viewer Sarah Smith sent something, and she asks about specific details on where we'd see funding cuts. So would you all like to answer, Sarah?
Well, I've been through 2 recessions with the city, and this is more or less going to have the effect of forcing a recession or a recessionary situation on everything in the general fund budget that's not police. We see the first thing it usually goes is pools. We stop maintaining parks at the same level. We shut down libraries. We reduce in small ways the number of people in public health. We don't change the number of people. We don't change the number of EMTs. We don't add fire stations. Some stuff's going to be frozen. Some stuff's going to go down. But something's going to have to go down. We've seen before, parks and libraries usually takes the brunt of the damage, at least at first.
And we know that you have years of experience researching, and so you have said in the past that 2 officers per 1,000 people won't correlate to lower crime. Can you help us understand that?
If you look at crime rates in police all around the country, you often find that the crime rates are lowest in the cities that have the fewest police officers. Some cities have lots and lots of police officers. Washington, D.C., Chicago have 3, 4, 5 police officers per 1,000 population. They have much higher crime rates. There's no correlation whatever between crime rates and police officers. And if you add police officers, you don't find much change in crime at all. You certainly don't find much change in homicides and aggravated assaults. There's no evidence anywhere that adding police is going to have an effect on homicides or aggravated assaults.
So what does work to reduce crime? What should the alternative to Prop A be?
Well, I support what our police chief is doing, trying to take illegal guns off our streets, because quite frankly, that is a lot of what we're seeing and seeing on your newscasts and reading about in the media. But we always have to keep in mind, as our police chief just said yet again publicly, Austin is a safe city. We're in the top 4 safest cities in the country. So a lot of what we need to be doing is to keep doing what we're doing, but to do it better. And I think that the process we're on right now is leading us to that. But cities across the country come to Austin to see what it is that we're doing right, because overall crime is so low here.
We want to go back to our studio, KXAN Live studio, where our Will Dupree is monitoring questions we're getting online right now. Will?
Yeah, Robert and Britt, we really want to go back to the cost of Proposition A, and a question we've received several times in the last few minutes. If we could specifically ask what social services and city departments would potentially see cuts if this proposition passes.
Well, I think you look at the general fund budget, which is just over $1 billion. $430 million of that is being spent on police alone. Almost 70% of that budget is being spent on public safety. So if you're going to add $600 million over the next 5 years, I don't know how you don't cut at least some of it from that 70% of the budget. But since you can't cut it from police if Prop A passes, that means it has to cut from EMS or from fire. And that's why the Fire Association is opposing Prop A. If you get into the other 30%, well, my colleague on the council in the last 15 minutes suggested we cut spending on homelessness and social services. Certainly, we're going to have to look at that. We know historically, when they're in recessions, there are cuts in services to pools and parks. We'd have to take a look at that. I mean, it's going to be a horrible decision for this community to make. And frankly, I don't want to be part of that, which is why I'm hoping that people don't vote for Proposition A.
Will? Well, we are thankful that you both came and appreciate your views, and hope everyone votes when the time comes, and early voting starts next week. In the meantime, we need to tell you it starts on Monday, October 18th. The last day to apply for a ballot by mail is October 22nd. And Election Day is coming up on November 2nd.
And this concludes Ballot Breakdown, our virtual town hall, but we're not done yet. When we come back, we're going to set the ballot issues aside, and we'll hear from the man in charge of leading our police department.
Chief Joseph Chacon will give us an inside look at the Austin Police Department, the changes to keep Austinites safe, and what he wants to see in the future. We will be right back. We want to bring in Chief Joseph Chacon for some insight on his vision for the Austin Police Department since he's taken over the helm.
And we firstly want to say, Chief, congratulations, because we haven't seen you since you've been confirmed. And so we are just so happy that you're here with us. And, you know, when we think back to that time when you were confirmed chief, it was such an elated moment. We saw big smiles. We saw you shaking hands. Here's the video, actually. What a celebration it was. Can you take us back to this day and just talk about a little bit about what is exciting about this new job?
You know, I think that this is kind of a pivotal moment for policing in this country, especially policing here in this city. I'm just very excited and honored to have the opportunity to lead this organization as we move forward, as you know, we're doing the changes that I think that the community really wants to see. And I'm just really glad to be able to do it.
You know, I know you're a Texas guy. Many people might not know you're a Texas native. When you think about your childhood and your upbringing, did you always want to be a cop, or was it something you stumbled into? You
know, it's funny. I'm probably one of the few that did not, you know, as a child, want to be a police officer. I have no law enforcement in my family. I hadn't really thought about it, and it wasn't until I met some officers and really started talking to them about what they did, and that intrigued me and really got me interested, and ultimately, I joined the PD.
Well, the call to reimagine public safety stemmed from the national conversation about policing. What changes are you ready to make with the APD in that regard?
You know, it really is changes that we've been making. As we've gone through the whole process, one of the biggest changes that we've made is to our police academy and the way that we are training our cadets, and really looking at it through a public service lens, and making sure that we are creating the right kind of officers that the community has asked that they want to see. I think to a large extent that has always been what we've attempted to do, and our officers serve honorably and have that servant's heart. But changing the way that we are training really helps us to do it from the ground level.
What is your overall vision for improvement?
I think that it is about connecting with our community in a way that builds trust, in a way that builds the legitimacy of the police department, so that when we have that, we'll have people that are more willing to call 911, that are more willing to cooperate with police when we're doing our investigations, that our officers are treating people with dignity and respect. I think that is going to increase that legitimacy for our department, and that really is my vision for the department.
The current cadet class is currently under scrutiny by several outside agencies, and right now the city doesn't plan to hold another one until this one is evaluated. Here's a look at some of the cadets currently going through the process. Are you satisfied with the changes and the current training?
We have been in constant communication with those that are conducting the assessment, really listening to what they're seeing, and I don't think there's going to be any surprises for us when they present the reports to council in the coming months. I've been very pleased with the progress that we have made. I think that they have been pleased as well to see that we are really moving into this new area, doing it the right way. And have we gotten everything exactly right? Well, it's kind of early in the process. So, of course, it's going to take some time to completely change a culture, but we're well on our way.
What kind of person would you like to recruit to be an Austin police officer?
I think it's great that we have a person who has a heart for service, that is getting into the line of work for the right reasons, that wants to help people, that is looking to make a difference in our community. We can certainly provide the training to show them how that can happen and help keep this city safe. As long as they have the right mindset coming in, I'd love to hire them.
How diverse is this current class?
This was the most diverse class that we had ever hired in our history. Almost 60% minority. We had a large number of females, African American, Hispanic, and Asian officers. So, we felt it was important to get that diversity in there and the department reflect the community that we serve.
Are you getting mostly people from Texas to apply?
We do better when we recruit locally. And so I think that that's important for retention as well, and people staying here. So we really try to find that native Austinite, as hard as it is to find them these days, but people from here locally in Texas make a lot of sense to us.
You mentioned retention. We heard that you're considering bonuses to retain seasoned officers who are at retirement age, and maybe bringing back some folks who've retired. Have you done that?
We have, we've looked at getting some people who have left to come back and have been unsuccessful there, have had officers who are eligible to retire make a commitment to continue for 1, 2, or 3 more years with the department while we kind of reload those vacancies and get the cadet classes through, so that part has been a success.
Is there any other way to recruit a better cadet class going forward?
I think, just as an example, our recruiting unit is the most diverse unit in the department. So when they go out, they're recruiting, whether it's at a college campus or in our community, and trying to get people interested in this line of work. Those folks that are coming up and asking questions see officers that reflect the community. And so, that is how we're looking to really diversify and get those good candidates.
Community input, it's very important in Austin, as you've come to realize. How would you evaluate that?
Just to make sure the community input towards the academy class.
Yes.
We constantly are listening, and right now have 2 different groups that are actually, looking at how we're conducting the training and making those kind of inputs. And so we're going to continue to do that and really listen not only to them, but as those suggestions and recommendations come through other venues as well.
We've been hearing about some of your changes, which are really refreshing, but what is the biggest challenge you think you face with this department? You have exposed some of the flaws publicly. Can you talk about some of those? Certainly. I think that the biggest challenge that we face right now, and really it's on two different fronts. The first being the staffing in the department is is not in a good place. For as big as our community continues to grow, we've seen our Priority 0 and Priority 1 calls, which are our highest level emergency calls, those call times have extended and gotten longer. That's not good when somebody calls 911 and needs someone. Really the other part is, I think, just making sure that we as a department continue to be responsive to our community and are, and listening, like I'm talking about, whether it's at the academy or we're making other changes in the department, that's going to continue to be a focus. Throughout this newscast, we've been talking about how homicides are rising year to year, and so we're wondering, is the staffing shortage sort of contributing to the rise in homicides within our community? I think that it's my opinion that one of the best deterrents for crime is visible officer presence. And, having fewer officers on the street, particularly if it takes longer to get to that emergency call and maybe get an offender into custody, is going to make a difference overall in our violent crime response. We've been putting programs into place to make sure that we are, being as effective as we can in deterring violent crime. But as you've pointed out during this, during this town hall, we've seen a marked increase in gun violence, in homicides and aggravated assaults. And so we continue to grapple with that problem. And I'd like to get your take on the latest news we reported on, which is people now using 311 instead of 911 to report certain crimes. We heard a ripple effect throughout the community from that one. What do you say to everybody on that note? Yeah. A lot of people concerned about it. They are, and I think that there is certainly some confusion about what the change really means. So to be clear, we had been referring already many people to 311 for other types of calls. What we did on October 1st was expand that list a little bit based upon our need to keep our officers available to handle those emergency calls, and where it really made sense that you might have a call that you don't need an officer there. All you really need to do is take a report. So if we make it easier for somebody to make a report over the phone or online, as opposed to waiting sometimes hours for officers to show up at their door because it is a lower priority call, that makes a lot of sense to do that. And then we will be looking at, if they need to turn in a piece of evidence or have, a statement taken. All of those cases are still being routed to the investigative units, and we have investigators that can do that, after the fact.
This went into effect on October 1st, and consequently, you would think that fewer officers are responding to the non-emergencies. Does that mean the response time has gotten better?
We're really looking at that data right now. We're only, about 12 days into this effort. The short-term data shows us that it has, but I think it's not a big enough data set at this point for us to be able to, clearly say that it has gotten better. I think over time that will become clear. And we really want to look at a bigger data set. When we talk about crime and violent crime in particular, when we speak about homicides, are you seeing a certain trend pop up here in Austin regarding homicides? I think that we still have many of the same type of driving factors behind homicides that we've always had, whether that's domestic violence, many interpersonal conflicts. But one of the things that concerns me is that you might have interpersonal conflict that before was simply an argument or a fist fight, and it's now becoming a gunfight. And we saw that this past weekend in downtown, And we're seeing it really almost on a daily basis in the city. It's very concerning and something that we are addressing directly.
Very quickly, crime on 6th Street. A lot of people I speak with don't go down there anymore, won't even think about going down there. What about safety on 6th Street, improving the situation?
You know, we've been working on a Safer 6th Street initiative to look at how, what kind of environmental things can we put in there, whether it's more lighting or better, better things to keep people safe while they're trying to navigate downtown in our entertainment district on the weekends, late at night. And we are actively working. We're one of a number of departments that's working towards that. I think that the education piece, as well as whatever measures we can put in place, may help it in the long run.
Well, tonight at 10 o'clock on KXAN, you'll see what happened as our investigative team followed Austin police officers patrolling downtown last weekend. Our crew was within blocks of a deadly shooting, which included an officer firing a weapon. And Chief, we know this is still under investigation, so we're not going to ask you about the specifics in the case. Talk more about the challenges that we're seeing after hours, not only downtown, but in the nighttime hours in Austin.
You know, I think that Austin is just this really great, thriving city. We have a great entertainment district in the downtown area that has grown very popular. Has been popular for years, and we're seeing bigger crowds now, especially as COVID, we're coming out of it, and people certainly feel safer to come out and be out there. And it's many of the same challenges that we've faced before. One of the issues, however, is that it's tougher for me to continue to fully staff shifts, especially those working downtown. I've got to not just keep the public safe, I've got to keep my officers safe. Right. And so we will adjust as we need to. And if I have to pull officers from other parts of the city to come and work in that downtown area because we have something like what we saw happen this past weekend, that leaves those other parts of the city with fewer officers. And so that is going to continue to be something, staffing really is a pressing issue for us.
And we keep talking about that. Do you know why you're so short-staffed?
I think that the last couple of years have been really tough for police. It's a driving narrative in our country that policing is broken. There's been a strong push for police reform. And in many cases, as we saw, protests and other types of activity that have been very demoralizing for police officers. I think that people, sometimes forget how wonderful the police officers that serve Austin are, and that they do a great job day in and day out. That largely goes under the radar because everything goes as planned. People just can't lose sight that they really are professional and serve with integrity and honor.
And we should commend you, Chief. You've already made one big change regarding transparency, and that's offering up video from a shooting. And so Friday, we know that you're going to release a portion of video from the shooting that we actually just showed you as part of your promise to show any officer-involved shootings to the public within 10 days of an incident happening, of when an incident happens. So are you making any other changes to improve officer accountability, can we ask?
I think that's always going to be front and center for police departments. When we talk about, trust and legitimacy, accountability is right at the center of that. So if I have to make, decisions about making changes such as the one that you described, or personnel changes or other things that are going on in the department, I want to be as transparent as I can about that with the public. And when I hold officers accountable because they've fallen short, then I'm going to make that public as well.
Chief Joseph Chacon, thanks very much for being with us live here on KXAN. We really appreciate it.
Glad to be here.
And we remind you at home to join us back here at 6 o'clock for a report on what the Office of Police Oversight is recommending when it comes to officer use of force training. Plus, we will have the rest of the day's local news and weather.
All righty, stay with us right here. We send you next to NBC Nightly News with Lester Holt.